Ever been so hungry you feel like your stomach's eating itself?
Oh, yeah.
Turns out there's a name for that, autophagy.
Huh.
But we'll circle back to that. Today, we're diving into a time when hunger wasn't a craving, but a daily reality. Think 1944, World War II.
The Minnesota Starvation Experiment. A fascinating, ethically complex study. Volunteers. 36 conscientious objector.
We've got researcher notes, first-hand accounts, historical analyses, the whole 9 yards.
Wow.
Okay, picture this. 1944, world's at war. These men, pacifists to their core, want to serve their country, but without, the whole fighting thing.
These were primarily guys from various peace churches. Huge pressure to enlist back then. They are often labeled cowards.
Right. And the Minnesota Starvation Experiment.
Yeah.
It was a way out. Contribute to the war effort while staying true to their beliefs.
Professor Ansel Keys saw an opportunity. Study starvation in a controlled setting. Famine was a global crisis. He wanted to understand its effects on the body and mind to improve relief efforts.
So he asks these men, willing to suffer from hunger so others can eat better.
Imagine the conviction it took to say yes to that. Over 400 did. Volunteered to essentially starve.
And not everyone made the cut, right?
Oh, no, it was rigorous, like an elite team tryout. But instead of athleticism, they wanted peak physical and mental resilience.
So what were they looking for?
Think it. 20 to 35 years old, intelligent, excellent physical condition, emotionally stable, and get this cheerful disposition.
Cheerful disposition, about to starve yourself, dedicated bunch.
They needed to withstand the physical and mental toll.
So they're in, ready to go.
Yeah.
What were the living conditions like before the starvation phase?
Basic, but not terrible. Communal living at the University of Minnesota lab. Basic amenities, regular meals, some social activities. They needed that baseline data before things got real.
The calm before the, shall we say, intentionally induced hunger storm.
Mm-hmm.
So 3 months of normal life, college dorm vibes, then bam, the experiment hits. What changed?
Drastically cut their calories. Down to 1,600 a day.
Half their normal intake.
Imagine running on fumes.
And the exercise regime on top of that.
35 kilometers walking, minimum. Plus chores, wood shopping, hauling. They had to simulate famine conditions, the constant energy drain of just finding food.
Physically brutal.
Yeah.
But these accounts, they highlight the mental aspect, right? There's that story about the participant fixated on ice cream.
Oh, yeah. He'd stand outside the parlor for hours just watching people eat.
No way.
It got so bad, he bought an industrial ice cream maker. Couldn't even use it, but he had it. Shows how hunger warps your brain, makes you crave the most basic things.
I get hangry, but I've never skipped a date to oogle a restaurant.
This wasn't about cravings, it was deeper than that. This was deprivation changing them. They became obsessed with food, cookbooks, meal planning for food they couldn't have.
Really?
Chewing gum, 40 packs a day, just to feel like they were eating.
Wow. And their behavior? It shifted drastically. These were mentally strong guys, pacifists. But then the anger, the frustration, even fights didn't match their personalities.
It unraveled their social fabric. Relationships suffered. Hobbies forgotten. They became withdrawn, fixated on food. It was all-consuming.
Some even turned to self-harm, engaging in risky behavior, like they needed to feel something, anything, other than that constant hunger.
And then the nightmares started. Vivid, disturbing. One guy dreamt he was a cannibal, woke up screaming.
Oh, man.
This wasn't unusual. A lot of them reported similar things. Shows how connected our mental and physical well-being really are.
It's tough to imagine enduring even a day of that.
Yeah.
But the experiment went on, right?
Keys was determined. He needed to understand starvation fully, and more importantly, he needed to find a way to help people recover from it.
So what happened when the starvation phase ended? How did they reintroduce food? So the moment of truth, they can finally eat. What happened?
You'd think it'd be this huge celebration, right? Back to normal. But their bodies were, they were pretty messed up.
In what way?
Think about it. They were in starvation mode for so long. Their bodies had adapted to survive on almost nothing.
Right. Makes sense.
Suddenly, flooding them with food could have been really dangerous, like a shock to the system.
Oh, wow. So how did they handle it? Like easing back into eating?
Exactly. They had to gradually increase their calories super slowly, like baby steps.
And I'm guessing they were watching them like hawks the whole time.
Oh, absolutely. Every calorie, every bite was carefully controlled. They had to make sure their bodies could handle it.
So instead of a feast, it was more like a very regimented diet plan.
Pretty much. They started with small, frequent meals packed with nutrients. And even then, some guys had a rough time.
Really? I figured once they could eat again, they'd feel better?
Not quite. Some of them still felt that intense hunger, even after eating a ton of food. It's like their bodies had forgotten what it felt like to be full.
Wow, that's incredible. It really shows how deeply starvation affects you. Like it rewires your brain and your body.
Yeah, totally. Some guys even developed long-term habits because of the experiment,
Like what?
like always cleaning their plate, saving every little scrap. Even if they weren't hungry, they couldn't stand the thought of wasting food.
Wow. I guess after going through something like that, it makes sense. Food insecurity becomes ingrained in you.
Exactly. It's a primal instinct, the need to survive. And for these guys, that instinct stayed with them long after the experiment ended.
So we've talked about the physical and mental toll,
Yeah.
but what about the bigger picture? Did this experiment actually make a difference?
It did. Professor Key's research was a game changer. Back then, famine relief was pretty basic, just giving people food. But Key showed that it's not that simple.
Right. You have to be more careful, like we were just talking about.
Exactly. He proved that gradual refeeding, nutritional balance, psychological support, it's all crucial. His work completely changed how we approach famine relief.
Wow. So these men who volunteered for this incredibly tough experiment, they ended up helping to save countless lives.
In a way,
Yeah.
yeah, their sacrifice wasn't in vain. Their willingness to endure such hardship helped us understand starvation and how to combat it. It's a pretty powerful legacy.
It really is. And it's amazing how many of them went on to dedicate their lives to helping others.
Like Harold, he used his experience to help with famine relief in post-war Europe. Imagine that.
And Marshall Sutton, working with refugees in the Middle East, and William Anderson fighting hunger in Africa for almost 30 years.
It's like that experience during the war.
Mhm.
It fueled their empathy, their desire to make a difference in the world. It's pretty inspiring.
It really is. So we've covered this incredible historical experiment. But before we wrap up, you mentioned a modern-day connection, something about autophagy.
Yeah, basically, it's this natural process where your cells do a little self-cleaning, they break down and recycle old or damaged parts to stay healthy.
So like a cellular cleanse.
Exactly. And recent research even suggests that fasting, not to the extreme these guys went through, of course, but moderate fasting can actually stimulate autophagy, like giving your cells a nudge to start cleaning house.
Huh, that's fascinating.
Mm.
So the Minnesota Starvation Experiment, this study on the horrors of famine, might actually hold some clues about living healthier lives. Who knew?
It's a trip, right? And it all goes back to this incredible ability our bodies have to adapt, to find ways to survive and even thrive in the toughest situations.
Well said. It really makes you think about the resilience of the human spirit and the importance of understanding the profound impact of something as basic as hunger.
Absolutely.
And on that note, I think we'll wrap up this deep dive. A huge thank you to our expert for sharing their insights on this fascinating and complex topic. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us. If you're interested in learning more about the Minnesota Starvation Experiment or the science of autophagy, we'll have some links in the show notes. Until next time, stay curious.